Broadcasting from the heart of downtown Hollywood. This is SoFloRadio.com. SoFloRadio.com presents CEOmanship, becoming a leader in today's business world, with your host, Steve Gordon, CEO of Gordon Partnership Group, an international business consulting firm specializing in CEO bootcamp, sales team training, as well as client growth and retention. Visit GordonPartnershipGroup.com. Gordon Partnership Group. Your success is our business. And now, here's your host, Steve Gordon.
Another happy Monday.
Happy Monday, Steve.
Hey, George. How are you, buddy?
I love time traveling with you.
I love time traveling with you, too. We're here, and it's another absolutely stellar day in South Florida. My name is Steve Gordon, and I am the host of CEOmanship Radio and CEOmanship Television on SoFlo Radio and SoFloTelevision.com. To my left, those of you watching live on your computers, your iPhones, your iPads, your Androids, don't want to leave anybody out, maybe even your Windows phones for some of you, is my producer extraordinaire, George Rodriguez.
It's awfully warm of you to include the Windows phone users.
There's a couple of them left.
I still have one, but I don't actually use it. 5 minutes.
You notice I left the crackberries out. I think they're finally.
I think my brother's the last one.
I had to pry the BlackBerry out of Lori's hands.
It's a cult.
It's crazy. For like a year, she's like, when do we do for an upgrade? When do we do for an upgrade? I need an iPhone. This is years ago, right? We have to get iPhones. We're the only people who don't have iPhones, right? The little trackball was like falling out of her phone onto the floor and rolling. We're at parties and she's under the table and I'm like, what are you doing under the table, honey? I'm getting a little leery, right? And instead, she's like, oh no, I dropped my trackball from my BlackBerry. I'm like, okay. Anyway, she's gonna love that. She's going to start texting me any second going, what's up with you? Anyway, so yeah, but then when we finally got the iPhones, right, we brought them home. I immediately take mine out of the box because I'm like uber geek. Well, I thought I was uber geek until I met our guest today, who is definitely a very cool, very intellectual, and I say geeky in only the finest way because I think... what?
It's not an insult
When
anymore.
we were in school, to be smart and geeky wasn't cool, but right now... It's not only cool,
it's cool,
but either you are one or you work for one. So you might as well be one.
Wish you were one.
So yeah, our guest today is an exceptionally smart gentleman who started a very cool company. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a second when we bring him on, but that's my teaser. But I will just tell you, we're going to talk about not only Bitcoin, but a very unique service, because most people who understand Bitcoin think that Bitcoin is just sort of this electronic currency, which I guess is correct. I'll be corrected in a minute, I'm sure. But now there are actually ATMs where you can exchange cash for Bitcoin, and I guess vice versa. And Eric Grill, who's the CEO of Coin Outlet, is going to talk to us a little bit about his Bitcoin ATM kiosks. So we'll bring him on in just a quick second. I realize we're now a week and a half after Thanksgiving, but I am still in like an
Are you still recovering?
Yeah.
You're like Thanksgiving lagged?
Yeah, I'm still sort of feeling that turkey. We didn't have a chance to really talk. Do you have a good...
I had two, because, I had the family and then I have the other family. It's a weird thing. I have some friends that are, we're kind of a conjoined family. So I had two feedings with a nap in between. I know how to do things.
Nice. And was this as you would like to say, was this a traditional Thanksgiving, or was this sort of a...
Yes, both times. I mean, for the love of God, man, we're not communists.
That wasn't what I meant.
No, yeah, I mean, isn't that the whole purpose? What's a non-traditional?
Well, sometimes you talk a little bit
like
about
vegan. I mean, we had a soy turkey. We shaped it kind of like a turkey.
No. Sometimes when you and I have conversations, you refer to like a Cuban birthday party.
Oh, I see the Cubans. Yeah, no, well, at least certainly the Cubans in my family are very thoroughly steeped in Americana. Mm-hmm. So any excuse to eat turkey, and of course the Cuban Christmases, because we did discuss that. That's a little bit porky, that's a little bit pork intensive.
Okay,
the Cuban Christmases, but so we'll recap that at a time. I'm going to move your microphone.
You're going to move my microphone, so they can see my face.
Yeah, I would just want to move it out of the way of the camera, which is all important these days. I was discussing that with our guest before the show.
Oh, good. So yeah, so speaking of the camera, why don't we bring up our guest, and I'll tell everybody who he is because I don't want to waste any time. There you are. So this gentleman, Eric Grill. Eric has been a software developer and an entrepreneur for the last 15 years, and he started working with Bitcoin way back in about 2012, which doesn't sound like a long time ago, but when you understand the genesis of Bitcoin and its acceptance, you realize that was actually a long time ago. Quickly, he realized the potential of this relatively new technology and immersed himself in what's called mining, buying, selling, advocating Bitcoin as a new means of e-commerce. And we're going to talk about what those terms mean. Basically, relying on his experience in the world of financial software, predominantly in the hedge fund arena, he knew that the market could grow only if access to Bitcoin was available to everyone. And that's another amazing thing about Bitcoin technology and Bitcoin as a currency, is that it really knows no borders. So the idea of a Bitcoin ATM, an ATM, was born. And as with many innovative ideas, this one was being implemented by several other manufacturers, but none of them were aimed at the market that Eric knew had the greatest potential. And so in early 2013, he approached Richard Haber. I'm going to ask you if this is a friend, or I guess you'd done some business in the past on several major projects, and recruited him. Eric is unbelievably enthusiastic, and he is really driven. He's very infectious. We had a great conversation last night through a different technology I'll tell you about, and was able to bring the Coin Outlet brand and its premier ATMs to the public in less than a year, which is unbelievable when you think about the technology and the marketing and the money and all of that. Eric's also an active member of the Bitcoin community and recognized and sought after authority in the cryptocurrency world. Eric, welcome to CEOmanship and to South Florida. How's that? Yeah, I'll give you. We don't really do that often, but yeah,
No,
welcome
he
to the
doesn't.
show.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Nice to be
It's
here.
good to have you. So for our folks, we are streaming this live on Blab right now from the inside. So you may have some people who are typing in some questions, and if they come, I'll certainly read them to you. You're reading that and having conversations with you last night. I'm looking and thinking to myself, that was a daunting project to bring to life in literally a year. Let's go back to the beginning. So you were in the hedge fund industry,
Mm-hmm.
and you were involved in the hedge funds from the software side.
Yes. Yeah. We were building software for the various hedge funds, prime brokerages, and banks. Yeah.
Okay, and so all of a sudden this Bitcoin, this name, this term starts sort of floating around, and like, how do you go from the software side of the hedge fund arena to deciding that you want to not only promote this currency, believe in this currency, and at the same time bring it to life through a cash machine of something that's not really cash?
Well, because I didn't see it as cash. I saw it as something that was disruptive in the software industry as well. I mean, the way that we had been building, centralizing all of our servers and things like that, this was a solution to that. And I thought that was very interesting to do. In fact, I didn't get involved in it really to build Bitcoin ATM machines. I got involved in it in order to build derivatives, the similar things that we were already doing in the hedge fund world. But again, nobody was building the infrastructure, and if we're not going to build the infrastructure, we're not going to get to that piece. So that's what really led me to say, hey, okay, we'll build the shovels and forks. We got a gold rush going on. Let's build an infrastructure. So that's what I did.
Interesting. And so for those people who are not aware of the term, what does what is Bitcoin? And there's another term that's bandied around, blockchain. If you had to give Bitcoin 101 and blockchain 101, how would you do that? What would you say?
You can look at Bitcoin as a currency. It's certainly treated as a currency. It can be used as a currency. I think, without redefining what currency is, just talking about what Bitcoin represents, the underlying, which you mentioned was the blockchain technology, which would be similar to, saying that email represents the internet. So, obviously there's other technologies built on the internet. So the internet is blockchain, email is Bitcoin. So in this case, what is Bitcoin? You can think of it as a currency. It's a decentralized, not backed by any government or anything. It's an algorithm. It's a set of rules that everybody complies with voluntarily to be able to participate on the network. It's secured, and it's treated like a currency. It's traded like a currency. There's exchanges just like the Forex markets for our currencies. So, it's very difficult to, one of the problems with Bitcoin is it's complicated to explain what it is. It's very different than what people are used to using, especially in countries like the United States, where we're not used to having various currencies. In Europe, they use different currencies. They're familiar with, okay, well, I'm going from the pound to the euro to the lev, no problem. Here, we have the US dollar. We don't think about currency.
Yeah, my background is computer science, electrical engineering, and so I'm very literal. As an engineer, 1 + 1 has to equal 2. It can't equal anything else, or the equation isn't right. It was just drummed into my head in all those classes. So it's very, very hard for me to sort of comprehend this whole concept of Bitcoin and how it works, and the whole trust factor. It's like when I look up at the stars at night and I ask myself, like, logically, I go, wow, that's beautiful. Look at the stars. But then I start playing those games with myself and I go, like, where does it end? Okay, if it ends here, then what's behind that? So, and if you can't see it, then, so when you're talking to someone like myself who is either very literal or maybe skeptical,
right?
How would you sort of bring me back into reality and try to make me understand that this is safe, it's going to work, and put my faith in it?
Well, then we'll talk about blockchain, because that's sorry about that. Hold on one second. I'm sorry. Just one second.
That's all right. George, you've used Bitcoin.
I don't know anything about it.
Sorry about that. Okay.
That's okay.
Okay, so now we'll talk about the blockchain, because the blockchain is that distributed ledger, the immutable database that gets distributed, and that's what Bitcoin represents. Bitcoin is just it's sort of a made-up term. It's just a representation of what that underlying network is. So blockchain is nothing more than a ledger. When you buy a house, there was an owner that bought it, and then they sold it to someone else, and then in the courthouse they make an entry, and they went from this person to that person, and so on down the line. And that's really what the blockchain ledger is. Now, the real value of it is that you can put other things in there. You can hash into it, so to speak, wedding vows, contracts, housing titles, car titles, things like that. But that database is available to anyone in the world. It's a public ledger, so anyone can go and view and see the transactions that are on there and the values that are put into there. So for software developers, I think that's the real interesting thing. Bitcoin's not necessarily the interesting piece. It's that blockchain, that you no longer have a Microsoft SQL server, which is a centralized database that people can break into. You have a database that's distributed.
And so, by a distributed database, are you saying that pieces of information are stored on different pieces or different blocks of this? Like, if you looked at, like, for example, a child building, or better yet, Tinker Toys. And the reason I use Tinker Toys is because you have like a wheel, and then you have something connecting the wheel to the next wheel. And I'm just trying to give a visual for our listeners. And so are you saying by distributed database that there are pieces of information stored perhaps on different wheels, but when they connect together, they form the whole?
No, they're all together. So when you initially put a transaction onto the blockchain, and that's not necessarily all together, but when it gets put onto the database, onto the blockchain itself, and is a permanent part of that database is distributed everywhere, and everybody has that exact same database. You can say, here it is, and it matches what this guy has, and the hundreds of thousands of other databases that are all over, and they all equal the same thing, and that checksum value adds up, and that's how you verify that you have a valid blockchain database. So it's all on there. Anyone can download it. You can go to bitcoin.org and see the link there. Download the blockchain. You can go to blockchain.info and actually view all the transactions on there. You can see them happening in real time, and you can verify that the transactions are real.
Okay, so if this is available, and so if I go and I wanted to look at all, I could literally look at any transaction that's ever happened since the inception of Bitcoin?
That's correct, yes.
And so I guess for our listeners, then, I said to you beforehand, I think I know enough to be dangerous. So would this then be, for, as you mentioned, checks and balances, so that everybody has the ability to see the transactions that everyone else makes?
Correct. That's
so
correct.
Then going with that thought process for a minute, if one of the reasons that I would think that people want to use Bitcoin, besides for the fact that it allows for direct transfer of funds from one person to another, is a little bit of anonymity. Correct? But if all of this is available, then where's the anonymity?
Well, all they see on the transaction would be, that $3 went from this wallet to this wallet. Now, unless you're attached to that wallet, nobody knows who you are. There's not a name attached to it. You own that wallet via public-private key encryption, which means you have a private key, and that proves that you own that address. If you're never attached to that, if your name is never attached to that, in theory, that piece of it is anonymous, but the transaction itself is not anonymous. Anyone can verify that transaction happened, and that's the value of it, is that anyone can see that transaction happened. You can keep the transaction ID to prove that, hey, I made this transaction, and you can prove ownership of that transaction via your private key. So
just stepping backwards again, in order to hold Bitcoin, to hold this currency, one needs to have, I guess, what's called a transaction or a Bitcoin wallet, right? And these are downloadable. And so what makes, maybe you could explain to everybody a little bit about how this wallet works in terms of keeping everything private, keeping your account, and then maybe we'll then I'd like to go back to that in a few minutes when we talk about your ATMs and how that all works together.
Sure. So you have a private key. So that's generated. It's SHA-256 is the hashing algorithm that Bitcoin uses, and so that's a public and private key, similar cryptography that everyone else is using. So you have a private key. So what the wallet does is kind of shield you from all of that complexity, and you have your private key in your wallet that you don't need to necessarily see. And when you make a transaction, it uses that private key to hash the transaction, puts it out for the world, and everyone can say, hey, this guy made the transaction because only the person with that private key could do this transaction. It's hashed correctly, that it equals, that it has a proper checksum, so to speak.
Okay, so I have my private wallet, and now how would, before I go to an ATM like yours, your company has, if I wanted to get Bitcoin to start, what would be the first thing I would do? Assuming there wasn't an ATM, and again, let's hope that there will be ATMs from your company all over the place very, very soon.
Sure. So the easiest way would be to get it from someone else that already has Bitcoin. So there's a QR code. So what that is a public key. So anyone in the world could scan that code that I just held up and send money to that address. They don't have to know who I am. I don't have to know who they are. They're able to send money to that address. And that public key, they can't take money from it. They can't do anything. They can just look at all the transactions that happened at that wallet address, but they can't do anything with it other than send me money, which makes it great because again, I can hold that up. You can send it to me. So what you would do is either through an exchange or a person, and there's various different platforms that allow you to do it, is get your initial Bitcoin that way, or work for it.
Okay, so by work for it, meaning that if I were to do any kind of work, look online, for example, I'm assuming that there are places where people will offer to pay then in Bitcoin,
sure.
and then they would just transfer from their account to my account.
Right. They would send you a transaction. They would pay you in Bitcoin, correct?
Being, again, the literal one, I think about when I first opened up a PayPal account, it was a long time ago. It was this whole foreign concept of like, oh my gosh, how are we doing trading money back and forth for services when we're not touching it? And my biggest thought was like, how do I get the money on the account?
Right.
And that was a big deal. So I guess it's sort of the same thing here.
Yeah. Well, here in the United States, there's Coinbase, which allows you to tie your bank account, and then you have a centralized wallet. So it's a little different than a pure Bitcoin play, because again, you're centralizing it and you're allowing someone else to hold your Bitcoins. Which really the point of Bitcoin is that you have your full banking system right here in your wallet. So the best idea is to have your own wallet and allow people to send it to you, rather than having an exchange like that. And if you're talking about anonymity, obviously, as soon as you tie a bank account or anything to it, now that public address is associated with your name, so there's no anonymity. Any transactions that go in and out of that address, they know who you are.
So okay, so now I've got my wallet, and I've got some Bitcoin in there. I did a little work for you. I did some coaching for you and your company, and all of a sudden, you pay me in Bitcoin. Now I've got this Bitcoin. And then I can use that, obviously, anywhere that accepts Bitcoin, which is now becoming more and more prevalent.
Correct, yes.
And so my iPhone falls out of my pocket and into a pond.
Mm-hmm.
And I fry my phone.
All right.
What happens to my Bitcoin?
If you didn't, so what you should do is secure your private key. So what you can do is export your private key and then secure that in a safe deposit box, bury it in your backyard, whatever you want to do with it as a backup. So if you lost it and didn't have that backup, you would lose your Bitcoin. Similar to if you lost your wallet and had cash in it, you're not going to get that cash back. It's gone.
So when you say secure your private key, are you saying literally like take a snapshot of this number, maybe a screenshot?
Yeah, print it out. You can print it out. You can put it on a piece of paper. You can export it to a file, secure it. There's a number of ways to secure it. But in essence, it's a long code. It's a long address that's your private key, and that's what your wallet represents. If you lose that, you won't be able to get those Bitcoins,
because you ain't getting 256 characters of guessing the code.
It's more than that, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So I'm sure there are instances of people I read a story today about a guy who I guess trashed a hard drive and realized he had like all his Bitcoin that was worth millions of dollars, and scoured a garbage dump and never found it.
Yeah, I've heard that. I think it was in England or something. Right. So he was mining Bitcoin very early on, and had accumulated a lot of Bitcoin, and I guess just stopped, didn't think anything of it, and then started reading about it and realized, wow, it's no longer worth 3 cents a Bitcoin. Now we're talking about $800-900 a Bitcoin, or whatever it was at the time, and he realized it, and realized he had millions of dollars worth of Bitcoins. And, crap, let me go find that hard drive, huh?
Oh, that's a bad day. That's a really bad day.
Yeah, I don't think you found them either.
No. So, all right. So you used a term. You said mining Bitcoin.
Right.
So, from what I understand in my reading, there will only be a certain number of Bitcoin ever created.
Right.
And so, how does that work? And what does that term mining mean? And what are these folks doing?
Okay, so miners are the transaction verification services. So, like what I said, when I hash and I send a transaction, I have my private key. The miners are the ones that are picking that transaction up and verifying, yes, this is a valid transaction, and they're doing what's called proof of work. They're doing all these hashing algorithms. It's very, very difficult. As time goes on and more miners come online, it's very, very difficult to mine. It's very competitive. And so they have to do a tremendous amount of processing in order to verify that transaction. And once they've verified that transaction, every 10 minutes, there's called a block. And so there's some Bitcoins are released. In this case, there'd be 25 Bitcoins released to one of the miners who solved the problem correctly. So he would get 25 Bitcoins, and that's how new Bitcoins get released into the market through these miners. But in essence, what the miners are doing is just verifying that these transactions are valid transactions.
So again, just step it back to make sure that I understand, and the audience is following. I'm sure they are. So these miners, basically, they've got to crack the codes to make sure that those algorithms are correct. The transaction codes are correct. Because nobody really... But so what's preventing... Here's the skeptic. See, I'm originally from New York. Well, you are too.
Yeah.
But so then what's preventing the miners, once they've sort of cracked my code to verify it's correct, from using that information then to basically take my Bitcoin?
They're not cracking the code. What they're verifying is that only one person could create the hash on that transaction, and that's the person with that private key. So all they're doing is verifying that that is a valid transaction. They don't know your private key. As long as they don't have your private key, there's no way for them to steal your Bitcoins. They never have access to that. All they're doing is verifying that that transaction is a valid hash, that's correct, that it was done correctly, and that the person who actually owns that address is the one that hashed that transaction. That's what they're doing.
And so in exchange for validating that process, they are rewarded with more Bitcoin. So it is really like a gold rush, hence the term miner. Because the more code you can crack, the more of these coins you get. The more of the coins you get, 25 of these coins at $1,000 a pop is a good day.
Yeah. Yep.
For anybody. And so, I was, again, online, I'm watching a couple of these, I watched a video about a large group here in the States and another group in the outskirts of China. And they've just got, it's just like rows and rows and rows of machines. And, they're talking about the fact that the electricity expense, if they don't hit the jackpot, you can go the other way. You could also lose. It's not like you just hit it every day.
No, right. That's correct. I mean, early on when I got started, these were revolutionary, and this was 333 million hashes a second. I can't even I would never get a Bitcoin if I operated these today. You could have rows and rows of these. It would never happen. Now we're talking about petahashes. I mean, I didn't even know what a petahash was a few years ago. Who the heck, who could wrap your head around that?
I.
Right, exactly. So now the level of competitiveness, because obviously there's been hundreds of millions of dollars dumped into this, it's very competitive. And so if you're not getting free electricity, you might as well forget about competing, or very low cost electricity. You have to recoup your cost of hardware because, again, the difficulty level of hashing these things keeps going up. As more people come on, it gets more difficult. So you have to have more efficient hardware. So yeah, the cost goes up.
Now tell me why does it get more difficult? Because more people are trying at the same time to find the same number, and somebody could hit it right before you do.
A number of reasons, but the network adapts as more people come online, and it becomes more competitive. What's called the difficulty goes up. So as more people are trying to do the same thing, the difficulty level will start rising, meaning you have to do more hashes in order to get to the solution. Yeah, and of course, you're competing with more people now on top of that. So now the idea that you're going to get less Bitcoin, do more processing power, but get less. So yes.
Eric, we're going to come back in a minute. Please stay with us. I want to talk more about your company, how you started the company, where you are today, where you see the business going, and maybe a little advice you can give the budding entrepreneur. My name is Steve Gordon. You're watching and listening to CEOmanship on SoFlo Television and SoFloRadio.com.
More CEOmanship with Steve Gordon next on SoFloRadio.com.
Put a team of professional consultants behind your home or business computer with Key Information Solutions, providing solutions to your internet and computing needs while keeping you on the cutting edge of technology. Preventative maintenance and networking support, hardware and custom-built computers. Let Key Information Solutions be your personal tech staff for your home or office with affordable hourly, monthly, or annual rates to fit anyone's budget. Call Key Information Solutions now, 954-973-3374. That's 954-973-3374. Or visit keyinformation.com.
Here's the latest ratings you asked for.
What is this? Where did all our listeners go?
SoFloRadio.com.
SoFlo, what channel is that on?
It's online, sir. Wi-Fi radio.
Oh, I see.
But what channel is it on?
Put your business on the leading edge of media advertising with the SoFloRadio.com network. Unlike antiquated AM or FM radio, your professionally produced 30 or 60-second ad will be heard live on SoFloRadio.com during the day and will be downloaded thousands of times a day on SoFloRadio.com, as well as being heard on our free podcasts on iTunes. Wi-Fi radio and Bluetooth are now available with BMW, Ford, GM Cars and Trucks. Don't get left behind. Contact SoFloRadio.com for details and our very affordable rates. SoFloRadio.com. Stay ahead of the game.
Now, back to CEOmanship with Steve Gordon on SoFloRadio.com.
We are back. George.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So Eric Grill is talking to us, giving us a great explanation of Bitcoin and the blockchain. But what I think people are really interested in hearing more about today is your company. You started Coin Outlet, the Bitcoin ATMs. Now, you only started this company a few years back, and within your first 12 months, you already had a working product on the streets.
Yep.
So how did that happen? I mean, I know you talked a little bit about originally about your background in the hedge fund industry, but at the same time, how do you go from software coding in the hedge fund to this idea that I'm going to create a machine that accepts cash, translates it into the proper Bitcoin currency amount at that time, and then I guess at the same time, if I want to convert my Bitcoin back to cash, I can do the same thing, which I think is really unique.
Well, I saw what was out there, and they were operating without any kind of compliance, which obviously here in the United States you need to. So the idea itself wasn't necessarily new, but I looked at what hardware was out there. I looked here in the United States trying to source doing that. I built it on the first one I built on a Raspberry Pi and like this thing, and just got a prototype working and realized, okay, we can do this. This isn't too difficult. The real complexity will be how do we implement these things that we need to do in order to be compliant in the United States.
So what are some of those compliance issues? What are the rules that one has to abide by when they're using or do we need another show for that?
Yeah. I mean, obviously I'm not an attorney, but the first thing I didn't hire a software developer or even begin developing it myself. I hired a compliance officer to help me get through this, someone who had worked in the banking industry 20 years. And so, he helped me get through. What do they expect us to do here? How do we get through these sort of regulatory hurdles? And at that time, there really wasn't a framework that we didn't know honestly, we thought if we put these things out, we're going to be thrown in jail the next day. We have no idea, how they're going to react to this thing. The IRS hadn't made any kind of determination. FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, part of the U.S. Treasury Department, had come out with some guidance on what we're supposed to do. But I had no idea what that meant. In the hedge fund world, it's not really regulated. You don't need to do pretty much anything. So I had no experience in the regulatory world at that point. So, I relied on him. What do we need to do to make them feel confident that we're doing the right thing for anti-money laundering, know your customer? So the IRS requires after $10,000 you have to do reporting to them. And then know your customer under the Bank Secrecy Act requires at $3,000 to gather information about who your customer is and what they're doing with the money.
When you say 3,000 or 10,000, is that a single deposit? Like if I know if you go to the bank and take a $10,000 cash amount of cash and you put it in the bank, then the bank is required to report that. Is that $10,000 put into currency at one time, or just when your account hits 10,000?
You could argue both sides. It's not very clear. The way we treat it is within a 24-hour period. So that's pretty much the consensus of it, that if you do it within a 24-hour period, or certainly within one transaction. So if you went and did $2,000 at one point and another $2,000, once you started hitting those thresholds, it's going to trigger they're going to call it structuring, which in itself is illegal. Just doing that to avoid the reporting. So that's.
So if somebody puts in 2,000 and 2,000 and 2,000 and 2,000, still that would raise an eyebrow.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. In fact, more than just an eyebrow. At that point, they're going to be thinking that you are doing it. It's called structuring, which is a crime. Just doing that. So if you went to the bank and there's the story of the little old lady that went in and put $9,000 in because she didn't want the bank teller to fill out all the paperwork, and they came after her for structuring and trying to avoid reporting. And so that in itself is illegal, just trying to avoid the reporting, to structure your deposits to do that. So yeah,
wow.
Certainly. There's,
you got a lot to juggle, and I guess the rules change constantly.
They've become more clear a little in the United States. There's other regulatory agencies that have stepped in, like the CFTC. I mean, so I mentioned the IRS, which is part of the U.S. Treasury Department. They've made a determination that Bitcoin is property. FinCEN, which is also part of the U.S. Treasury Department, doesn't agree. They say it's currency. And then you have CFTC, which says, no, it's a commodity. And so they're all right in sense, because it can be any one of those things. It doesn't really fit into any of those molds, and they're trying to sort of peg it in there and to have the existing regulatory framework apply to it. So it hasn't changed. I think it's just become a little more clear on what it is that they expect and what they want to do. So it's very similar to what the banks have to do.
In preparation for today's show, I did a lot of research because I didn't know a ton about Bitcoin, or certainly how it worked. And I found our conversation, the last conversation we had when we first met, really fascinating. And so I started to read about the difference between legal tender and money. And now you talk about property, currency. How does this differ in a sense from barter? Like, so all of a sudden, I come to you and I go, look, my fee is $10,000 a month, right? And so you say, well, I will barter whatever, and I go, great. In theory, right? So we've sort of done what should have been reported, or where do you draw the line? Again, I know you're not a lawyer, but
yeah.
Does that seem like a sort of out there sort of way to compare?
No, I think that is reasonable, and I think outside of the United States, they do look at it that way. Sweden determines that it's art. England has said they're not going to regulate it. They're looking at it just like the adoption of the internet. If we had regulated the internet and said, we have to regulate this like we regulate the telephone companies, you and I wouldn't be talking right now. We wouldn't have the internet we have today. And so most countries outside of the United States have taken that approach of, let's see what becomes of this. I mean, this is early on. Like I said, this is like email was to the internet. And then, of course, if they regulated email and regulated all of that early on, we wouldn't have Blab, and we wouldn't have we wouldn't have these types of new technologies that are coming online, because the innovation would have been halted. So most countries have taken a hands-off approach to see what comes of it.
Yeah. I would say you're saying the United States.
Yeah, no, but the United States took a more proactive approach because most countries are looking to the United States for guidance on, hey, what do we do with this thing? We don't understand it. And so there was so FinCEN stepped up and said, okay, we're going to call it a currency. A federal judge in Texas determined that it was, in fact, a currency. And from there, that's how they've been regulating it as any other currency.
Well, it certainly makes sense, because if they didn't regulate it, I mean, think about it. Everybody would want to put their money in Bitcoin, and everyone would say, I'm not paying taxes. Or they want to do, they want to, certainly they want to transact in Bitcoin to avoid those taxes. So I understand why the government jumped in on that real fast.
Well, right. I mean, when I say regulate it, they can't regulate Bitcoin itself. All they can do is regulate the on and off ramps, which is the U.S. currency to Bitcoin and Bitcoin back in the U.S. currency. And so that's what they're doing. So if you want to operate here in the United States with Bitcoin, right, they're gonna have you operating as if you're operating as an exchange or a money service business or a bank, and pick one of those. And all of them involve, FinCEN and the regulatory environment.
So this currency sort of is self-creating then, because you're saying that as the miners go out there and they crack the code, so to say, and they verify I don't want to say crack the code, but as they verify these transactions, then more of this Bitcoin is released. And because of the mathematical algorithm, I'm really geeking myself out here, right? Then eventually there will be a day when you've hit the maximum number of unique codes, and then there can be no more Bitcoin created. Is that true?
That's right. There'll only ever be 21 million Bitcoins released. Also, as part of those transactions, you just pay a small mining fee to incentivize the miners. So once all the Bitcoins are released and you no longer get, the Bitcoins every 10 minutes that, they've all been released, now the miners will be relying on the mining fees. And so the price of Bitcoin will obviously shift at that point to incorporate that. It still needs to be worth it to the miners to mine. So that price will reflect that.
So the miners, then you're saying at this point it's like an ATM fee, or a credit card processing fee that you'd pay now if you paid by credit card, and so eventually there'll be a small transaction fee for those who are.
Well, there is a voluntary transaction fee today. You can send it with no transaction fee, but there's no guarantee that a miner will pick it up. They do pick it up. I mean, if you want to send it with no fee, you can certainly do that, and you have no problems with them picking it up. Obviously, the more of a fee you pay, the faster a miner will pick it up because, hey, they want to get the higher fees. But you can send it with no fee. But if you send 0.001 Bit, as a fee, they'll pick it up right away, pretty quickly. If you send no fee, they'll still pick it up. It may just take a little longer.
So, in terms of the sort of getting people over the hump of being afraid to use Bitcoin as a currency, being afraid that there might be a hack or that they could lose their currency. I mean, what is the likelihood? I mean, are some of these databases, have they been hacked, and what's the protection going forward? Okay,
well, no. The network itself, the miners that are protecting the network are the biggest supercomputer in the world at this point. In order for somebody, I mean, we'd have to get a little deep in the weeds to explain how somebody could circumvent the system. It would cost trillions of dollars. It would have to be a state that did that. And even then, in my opinion, it's not possible. As soon as they started bringing that kind of hardware online, of course, everyone's going to notice it, and the market would adapt. And so there's really no way for them to do that. Early on in Bitcoin, it was possible. Maybe they could have played around with the numbers with double spends and things like that. Today, it's just not possible, in my opinion.
So let's talk a little bit about your Bitcoin ATM kiosks and your company.
Sure.
So, obviously, this was not an inexpensive product to bring to market. And for our viewers who are watching right now, we're bringing up some images of your ATM right now, and also a little bit of how the whole process works. But let's first talk. Did you raise private money? Did you go for VC? Did you look for an angel investor, or just take your own money with some friends? How did you start the company, and where did you go first?
Initially, I did it with my money. I had a real estate business. I used what I had from there to get it kickstarted. Obviously, a lot of sweat, and as you mentioned before, I brought Richard Haber on. He and I had worked together many years in the hedge fund industry, and so we worked together to create the software side of it, and the hardware side of it. We sourced it out to China. Figuring out, the body of it, so to speak, was just too expensive to build here in the United States. The hardware that's on the inside is pretty standard equipment across the board from Britain and the U.S. But the frame itself was very cost prohibitive to build here in the United States. So we found a manufacturer that was willing to work with us in China, and so they built the frame for us.
And then I'm assuming, again, I shouldn't assume, but then because we're dealing with a currency that fluctuates all the time, you have to be connected online, I would think,
Right.
your ATMs to be able to know the exact value of the Bitcoin, because I could go to your machine at one time and come back a couple hours later, and I guess the value could be different, or does that change daily?
Oh, no. It changes second to second. It's like any currency in the world. It fluctuates a little bit more than other currencies. It's a very immature currency, so it fluctuates more than a typical currency would. Of course, it's also the best performing currency in the world this year, but there's exchanges, and we look at those exchanges, and we tie the pricing across all these exchanges. And there's one in Slovenia, and they have U.S. dollars and euros, and there's one in Mexico that prices to the peso. So we look out across all of those, and similar to hedge funds, they look at the price of the underlying currency to Bitcoin, and where's the best price that we can get at that moment in time, and that's what we're pricing at our machine. We're able to, as long as we have money at one of those exchanges, we're able to price that at our machine. So when somebody puts money into the machine, unlike a typical fiat currency, we can instantaneously do the transaction at the exchange and bring that Bitcoin back into our quote hot wallet. So there's no time decay. We don't take any currency risk. We're able to hedge that risk immediately. So we're able to price that way.
So I have a friend of mine who is in the ATM business. And one of the things that I never realized, I just thought they always just had money in them. but my buddy told me that he has to drive around and literally put $2,000-$3,000 at a time in every machine. So part of his business is that he always has to have enough cash on hand in order to set the machines up. And then once the transaction fees come in, then then he makes his money that way. Is it this logically the same then? That in order to
we have the opposite problem that they do. People buy Bitcoin, so they're putting cash into our machine. We have a recycler, so when they put the cash into the machine, we can take that same cash and dispense it to the next customer. But that's never an issue. Honestly, 90% of our transactions are people buying Bitcoin, so the machine fills up with cash, and we have to empty the cash out of the machine.
So the question then is, do you did you need to have an investment where you actually owned a certain amount of Bitcoin before you could start?
Yes.
So you have the Bitcoin version of the cash version that my buddy has.
Right. Except I don't have to visit anything physically. It's
right.
Obviously it's located in the various exchanges across the world. Right.
That's really interesting. So at this point, you've got you have these ATMs out in the United States. I think you mentioned that you've got a couple either going or about to be going in Europe.
Yeah, we had one in Amsterdam for a little while. After Greece sort of fell apart, I went over to Greece and we moved the machine down there, and we've been working with the system, so to speak, there to get that put into place, and we're looking to probably actually get that up and running maybe this week, next week, and I'll be there in Greece early next month.
Well, that's great. Well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
So let me ask you another question then. If you've got the machines. If somebody was interested in putting a machine in place, what would they do? And like an ATM, I'm assuming there's probably something in it for them.
Yeah, I mean, well, we haven't sold the ATM machines. We've been operating them ourselves. One of the real costs is the compliance piece that I was talking about. You need to hire a compliance officer. You need to understand, it's a high-risk business. It's similar to like Western Union or a bank, that you have a compliance and you have an overhead cost there. So for the average person to operate a Bitcoin ATM machine is in the United States at least, is very difficult. You need to operate so many machines to cover the cost of what your compliance is going to be. So you don't see too many one-off operators in the United States, and if they are, they're probably not doing it legally, and they're just operating and not really being compliant. So
again, if let's say that I owned a 7-Eleven, or I had a gas station and I had an ATM, but I wanted to have a Bitcoin ATM. Would your company then license me? Give me the opportunity to license that from you, or to
we would operate it there for you. We partner with the Armored Car Services, so they handle the maintenance of the machine, and really we just need a Wi-Fi and electricity, and we're able to operate there. So really we just need the real estate to put it in. So if you wanted to operate the machine there, we would pay you rent or some other kind of revenue sharing, and put the machine in and operate it from there. It brings a lot of foot traffic, it brings a lot of publicity, and it brings a lot of other things to the business as well.
So speaking of publicity, I saw that you were in Pennsylvania, it looks like not that long ago, at a restaurant that started to accept Bitcoin. And maybe you want to tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, it was kind of a joke. I mean, I was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is Amish country, and I was close by. I figured, hey, let's throw it into a restaurant over here. So that's what we did. We put it into the restaurant, and had no idea that people would actually come and that people were using it and interested in it. And obviously, the news and TV was very interested in the first Bitcoin ATM machine in Pennsylvania. And so it really took off. It wasn't until I left the area that I removed the machine because I didn't want to service it. But it was interesting. And then of course the restaurant itself was taking Bitcoin for their sandwiches and stuff. So it was a very interesting experience to do that.
Yeah, I can imagine that they say that when people use credit cards, they spend more money because they feel like they have a little more flexibility. You don't feel like you're taking that $100 bill out of your wallet or those 20s or whatever they are. I would think it might even be more so with Bitcoin because it's not even like you don't even have to take the card out. You just kind of just wave your phone in front of the machine and like you're scanning your QR code when you're getting on an airplane at the airport, and that's your boarding pass, and then it does the transaction right there.
Right. Yeah.
So it's very painless.
I think that's one use case. I think what we found is predominantly it's the remittance market. People that go to Western Union and send money home to Mexico, Ghana, or various places, and have been paying, tremendous amount of fees. Obviously there's a tremendous amount of fraud and other problems that go into doing that. That this is an alternative to that. And so instead of paying the fees to Western Union, they're able to send more money home to their family. And so that's been a bigger, I think, use case for Bitcoin than even just merchants accepting Bitcoin.
So that's a really interesting thought, and I hadn't thought of that. So somebody sends money home. I would think, Mexico would be a little more of a stronger market, but like in Ghana, I mean, where?
Well, I can tell you an interesting story. We had a machine in Boston. It's in a mall. The security guard of the mall, when we were up there servicing us, came up to us and said, "Hey, I know you can send money home, but how does this whole thing work?" And so we reached out to there's a foundation in Ghana that deals in Bitcoin, and we reached out to them and said, "Hey, can you help this guy on the other end? Obviously, he can come to the machine and get his Bitcoin, but then how does his family convert that over to their local currency?" Turns out they don't use local currency in Ghana. They use phone credits. They're already using cryptocurrencies over there. There's M-Pesa. They've been using them for many, many years. They've sort of leapfrogged over this system. So in essence, what he's doing is he's buying Bitcoin at our machine, buying phone credits, and his family gets all of the money.
That's crazy. And here I am thinking, what would they do with it in Ghana? So you live and learn.
You can pay your utility bills in phone credits.
That's unbelievable.
Right.
It's a great world, and we learn. I mean, I learn from our guests all the time. George, you've used Bitcoin before.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I think you're going. You're going undercover.
Yes, no. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. We were speaking philosophically before the show, and personally, as a neo-anarchist, I believe that it's absolutely my right, to be able to barter or enter into any kind of agreement I want. So yeah, it's something that I've explored, and it's very exciting. And I sure wish that that Florida was more amenable to that kind of thing, because I think it's there's just a lot of uses for it, and it's great. And even if you just want to use it the way that a lot of people do, buying and selling currency, as an investment.
Right.
It's a wonderful thing. And I got to drive to Lancaster, Pennsylvania now, which I've always wanted to go, by the way. And are the sandwiches good? Please tell me at least.
Oh, yeah, the sandwiches are great at that place. Unfortunately, we don't have the machine there anymore. We did move it out of
there. Oh, that's too bad. What's the closest one to Florida now? Do I have to
There's a few. We don't have any, but there are some other machines, I believe, in Atlanta now.
Okay, that's not so bad.
Yeah, we have one. We put one in Overstock's headquarters in Utah, so they have one there. They actually accept Bitcoin at Overstock, and they pay their employees in Bitcoin if they'd like, and as well as the bonuses. Yes.
More and more people are taking it. What is it? Was it Harvard or Yale that decided to start taking Bitcoin for tuition? One of the big Ivy League.
Oh, well, MIT and Harvard. We actually have a machine at MIT and Harvard.
Okay.
So well, that makes sense.
How is there a maximum to how many Bitcoins or how much someone can buy from one of your machines with cash?
No, there's the machine will only hold so much money. So
how much?
That should be your problem, George. I don't think you have to worry, buddy.
Well, I'm using all singles because of the the tips that I get at
the tips you get when you're dancing.
Yeah,
I knew you
my
were this is
just
supposed
goes
to be
right
a
out.
business show, George.
I warned the guest.
That's
a business.
Most transactions honestly are under $100. People are coming out and just using the money, sending it home. Maybe if they have a check for a couple $100 and sending it home. So they're not. There's just a lot of people buying small amounts. And you can buy less. Today what Bitcoin's at $370 a Bitcoin. You can buy less than a Bitcoin. You can buy $1 worth of Bitcoin. Bitcoin breaks down into 8 decimal places, so you can actually own less than a penny's worth of Bitcoin.
I can afford that.
I'm going to do that. I after this show, I'm definitely, I'm intrigued. I think this is really interesting. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think, too, that the first time that people partake in the Bitcoin experience, so to say, they probably, come to the ATM with like a 10 or a 20 or a small bill just to really see that it works.
Oh yeah. They just want to see, and then they see it show up, and they're it's magic. It showed up here. I actually see it, and it's an eye-opening experience for people. There's a lot of meetup groups that form around these Bitcoin ATM machines because it's a very easy way to show people, hey, here's Bitcoin, here's how it works, here's how you can get it, and they can instantaneously see the Bitcoin show up. So yeah, it's very interesting.
So I thought I really understood all of this, and then you blew my mind last night when we were speaking, because you said that you actually had the first, it wasn't Bitcoin, but it was, I guess, the first blockchain wedding.
Right. Well, it is Bitcoin, because again, Bitcoin and blockchain, you can't separate the two. A lot of people want to talk that they're two different things. It's really it's like saying email's not the internet. Well, it's part of the internet. It's the same thing.
Right.
Right. So, like I said, you're hashing these transactions, but in that hash, you can actually embed in it words. The very first transaction that was done was actually a political statement. Was just a freedom of speech saying, "Hey, this is what I want to do." It had nothing to do with currency whatsoever. So, take that one step further. What is a wedding? It's a contract between two people. So, we did a wedding at Walt Disney World. The bride and groom each had a private key. They went through the ceremony, and then they went up to the machine, they scanned their private keys, signifying that, yeah, I'm entering into this transaction with the other person, and their vows went onto the blockchain, and they were married on the blockchain.
And then that stays as a permanent record because the blockchain is forever.
That's correct.
Hopefully, like their marriage.
That's right.
And so if somebody wants to look at this, they can actually go online and they can Google the words Bitcoin wedding,
right,
and watch the video.
Yeah.
Are you looking for anyone to help you with sales? Because we have listeners who might be interested in maybe.
Yeah, we're looking at all opportunities here. I mean, not just here in the United States. I think one of the bigger opportunities is probably outside of the United States. Here in the United States, we think we have a working banking system that isn't necessarily going to catch on. Outside of the United States, where they have real currency issues, Argentina, Brazil, South America, Latin America. There's real opportunity there because people don't trust the currency. Here we trust our currency. We don't think about it as much. So I think Bitcoin's sort of on the fringe here in the United States, and the adoption outside of the United States is probably bigger.
I have to tell you, I think about it all the time. I think about what happened in Greece. I think it could definitely happen here in the United States. Just look what happened to the banking industry not that long ago. We all forget very quickly, but it was in our lifetimes. Not that long ago, we had government bailouts of the banks, major corporations, too big to fail, etc. Well, guess what? At a certain point, and that's a whole nother show, it is very possible that there aren't going to be enough. There's not going to be enough to do all the bailout. And so, I think about this all the time. I go to the bank. I go, all right, well, it's still there.
Right. Well,
maybe.
Right, exactly. When something happens, obviously, everything I just said goes out the window. I can't predict when that's going to happen. All currencies have failed in the past, so why would we think that this is any different? But especially the way the system is today.
So how does somebody reach you? Whether they want to learn more about maybe placing an ATM, maybe they've got a great piece of real estate for you where it's high traffic, or maybe they're interested in working with you, or they just have questions about your company, maybe some press. How would they reach you? And
Sure. The best way probably is on Twitter at Eric Grill on Twitter, or our website, coinoutletsatm.com.
Coinoutletsatm.com.
Yep.
Well, this has been a head-spinning but really fun show. I've learned a lot. I hope that I know that our guests have, our listening audience has too. Really appreciate you taking this time out of your day to share your knowledge and your company, and we wish you continued success. We want to follow you and see these Bitcoin ATMs. Again, Eric Grill with Coin Outlet, Bitcoin ATM. Thanks for coming on. Come back anytime. Stay in touch.
Thank you.
And how do they find you on Blab?
At Eric Grill, same Twitter account.
At Eric Grill.
Yeah.
If you're not on Blab, you will be soon. And I'm sure that Eric's got some information to share with you one-on-one if you want to catch him there too. George, thank you so much for another great week, another great show. My name is Steve Gordon. You've been listening to CEOmanship Television and Radio on SoFlo Television and Radio.com.
Broadcasting from the heart of downtown Hollywood. This is SoFloRadio.com.